Vachamsi yoga gratitani sadho. Nano shamante manasapi petum. Vachamsi yoga gravitani sadho. Nanashamante manasapi petum.
Tadruya Sango Jadavani Buddha.
Tadruya Sango Jadavani Buddha.
Vijnana Vedo Vichashyapara.
Vijnana Vedo.
Vachamsi Yoga Gratitani Sadho.
Vachamsi yoga gratitani sadho.
Nana Shamante Manasapi Petum.
Nana Shamante Manasapi Petum. Mataji's.
Tadruya Sango Jadavani Buddha.
Vijnana Vedo Vichashyapara.
Vachamsi yoga gratitani sadho.
Vachamsi yoga gratitani sadho.
Nanashamante manasapi petum.
Nana Shamante Manasapi Petum.
Tat. Therefore. Bruhi. Please speak. The Sangha. You have no association with the material world. Jadavat. Appearing like a deaf and dumb man. Niguda. Completely hidden. Vijnana Virya. You have full knowledge of the spiritual science. And are thus very powerful. Vicharasi. You are moving. Apara. You possess unlimited spiritual glories. Vachamsi. The words uttered by you. Yoga Gratitani. Bearing the complete meaning of mystic yoga. Sadhu. O great saintly person. Na. Not. Na. Of us. Shamante. Are able. Manasa api. Even by the mind. Betum. To understand by analytical study. Translation. My dear sir, it appears that the influence of your great spiritual knowledge is hidden. Factually, you are bereft of all material association and fully absorbed in the thought of the Supreme. Consequently, you are unlimitedly advanced in spiritual knowledge. Please tell me why you are wandering around like a dullard. O great saintly person, you have spoken words approved by the yogic process, but it is not possible for us to understand what you have said. Therefore, kindly explain it. Please repeat. My dear sir, it appears that the influence of your great spiritual knowledge is hidden. Factually, you are bereft of all material association and fully absorbed in the thought of the Supreme. Consequently, you are unlimitedly advanced in spiritual knowledge. Please tell me why you are wandering Why you are wandering around like a dullard? O great saintly person, you have spoken words approved by the yogic process, but it is not possible for us to understand what you have said. Therefore, kindly explain it. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. His Divine Grace says, Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki. Saintly people like Jad Bharat do not speak ordinary words. Whatever they say is approved by great yogis and those advanced in spiritual life. That is the difference between ordinary people and saintly people. The listener must also be advanced to understand the words of such exalted spiritually advanced people as Jad Bharat. Bhagavad Gita was spoken to Arjuna, not to others. Lord Krishna especially selected Arjuna for instruction in spiritual knowledge because Arjuna happened to be a great devotee and confidential friend. Similarly, great personalities also speak to the advanced, not to Shudras, Vaishyas, women or unintelligent men. Sometimes it is very risky to give great philosophical instructions to ordinary people, but Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, for the benefit of the fallen souls of Kali Yuga, has given us a very nice instrument, the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. The general mass of people, although Shudras and less, can be purified by chanting this Hare Krishna mantra. Then they can understand the exalted philosophical statements of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Our Krishna consciousness movement has therefore adopted the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra for the general masses. When people gradually become purified, they are instructed in the lessons of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Materialistic people like Sri, Shudra and Dvijabandhu cannot understand words of spiritual advancement, yet one can take shelter of a Vaishnava, for he knows the art of enlightening even Shudras in the highly elevated subject matters spoken in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gnanjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmalitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest ignorance, but my spiritual master has forced open my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer respectful obeisances unto him. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uttapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Sam Sajivam Sarvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Shakam Vitamscha Shri Tatangano Vishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasundubhyevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Sarigora Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, Maharaj Rahugana, he can recognize from the words and also by the way that Jad Bharat is speaking that he's a highly advanced soul, highly advanced personality. Because he's speaking in a language that Maharaj Rahugana is familiar with. He's speaking, he's using examples that are there in the Vedas, he's using examples that are in the Upanishads. So Maharaj Rahugana recognizes that Jagat Bharat is fully conversant with the Vedic literature, and that he's also a great teacher. However, Maharaj Rahugana also expresses that he can't understand what Jagat Bharat is saying. He says, "O great saintly person, you have spoken words approved by the yogic process, but it is not possible for us to understand what you have said, therefore kindly explain it." So this is nice. He's really surrendering to Jagat Bharat here as a disciple. But he also wants to assure Jagat Bharat that he has appreciated that he has sufficient qualification to be able to digest the knowledge if Jagat Bharat is merciful enough to deliver it in a way suitable for Maharaj Rahugana's situation in life. Maharaj Rahugana is a king, and so therefore he'll have a particular nature. So he's not saying, "Oh, I understand everything that you say." He doesn't want to have a conversation with Jagat Bharat on an equal level. He's immediately putting himself in a position of surrender and humility by saying that it is not possible for us to understand what you have said. And so even if previously Maharaj Rahugana may have been able to understand what all of his Brahmin advisors were speaking to him, he may have been able to understand even a lot of sections of the Vedas. He may be a Rajrishi, he may be a highly elevated king, like Maharaj Yudhishthira or Maharaj Parikshit. But still he understands that if I'm really going to benefit by the association of this saintly person, then I should adopt a mode of a disciple. So this is a very good instruction for us. He's also expressing that it's also another thing we can learn from this verse is that in one sense the Vedas are not possible for us to understand because they're describing the inconceivable, supreme, absolute truth. It's described that Lord Brahma, even though he lives for a long time, 4,320 million years times 365 times 100, still he couldn't understand the Vedas until he'd read them all the way through, like 3 times. Only then could he understand them. So it's not surprising that the king expresses this, that he's bewildered, because Jagat Bharat is speaking from the highest level of transcendental knowledge. So although Maharaj Rahugana may have heard, as I said, the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, and may have even heard the Srimad Bhagavatam, but he'd never encountered such a great saintly person as Jagat Bharat. In a previous verse, Jagat Bharat says to the king, "My dear king, you have said, 'You rascal, you dull, crazy fellow, I am going to chastise you, and then you will come to your senses.' In this regard, let me say that although I live like a dull, deaf and dumb man, I am actually a self-realized person. What will you gain by punishing me? If your calculation is true, and I am a madman, then your punishment will be like beating a dead horse. There will be no effect. When a madman is punished, he is not cured of his madness." So it's interesting, Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, the verse that we're reading today, that materialistic people like Sri, Shudra and Dvijabandhu cannot understand the words of spiritual advancement. And this is because they're actually mad, they're becoming completely intoxicated by the material energy. But if they're instructed by a very highly elevated Vaishnava, then even persons who are very dull and very covered, then they can understand Srimad Bhagavatam. So, also Srila Prabhupada says that sometimes it is very risky to give great philosophical instructions to ordinary people, but Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, for the benefit of the fallen souls of Kali Yuga, has given us a very nice instrument, the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. The general mass of people, although Shudras and less, can be purified by chanting this Hare Krishna mantra. So it's interesting actually, when Srila Prabhupada first started writing the Srimad Bhagavatam in 1958, and he completed the first three, he completed the whole of the first canto before he arrived in the USA. So if you look at the first canto, Srila Prabhupada never quotes the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra at any time in the Srimad Bhagavatam in the first canto. And also we find that in the Srimad Bhagavatam itself, the original text, and in most of our other books that we study from the time of Lord Chaitanya, like the Chaitanya Charitamrita and the book and the Nectar of Devotion, and many of the books of the Goswamis, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is never written in full. So although it's a special instrument that was given by Lord Chaitanya, it's like Srila Prabhupada understood that it was so special that it mustn't just be given away whimsically. It must actually only be given when absolutely necessary to the right people. And it's interesting, even though many Indians and Hindus and even Vaishnavas were worshipping Krishna and understood and knew a lot of songs about Krishna, knew all about Krishna, but still Srila Prabhupada didn't print the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra in the volumes that were actually published in India. It's only after he came to America, and not immediately, it's not in the beginning of the second canto either, but only after some time did Srila Prabhupada occasionally quote the Maha Mantra in his books. This analogy of a madman, it's known that in Ayurvedic medicine, when somebody is exceptionally ill and nothing else works, then an Ayurvedic doctor will give that person poison. And it's because it just like it wakes up, it's like it hits the system so hard that the system goes into a kind of trauma mode, and the body actually heals itself, because it's like the body's got some inbuilt mechanism that when it gets poisoned, it kind of like puts all of its focus on survival. So Srila Prabhupada actually saw how the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra actually had that effect on people who were completely mad, like the hippies and many other people at that time. Many of Srila Prabhupada's first disciples who attended his lectures in New York in 1966 and 1967, even disciples who are now leaders of our movement and who are like great teachers, like highly elevated Vaishnavas, they admit that they couldn't understand any of Srila Prabhupada's classes on Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam when he was teaching in New York in 1966. But Srila Prabhupada, when he saw that the effect that the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra had on people, on his disciples, and also on the general public as well, then he was like in ecstasy to understand that how potent the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is, and how it was transforming people who not only in their habits were completely mad and degraded, but also in their philosophical understanding were completely at the opposite spectrum of the teachings of Krishna. So it's very interesting here that Srila Prabhupada says that Lord Chaitanya, for the benefit of the fallen souls of Kali Yuga, has given us a very nice instrument, the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. And it's interesting, when Srila Prabhupada was preaching in India, he said that he's getting a really good response in America with the young people who haven't studied philosophy and who don't know anything about Krishna. Whereas in India, because people think that they know about Krishna, then they have a tendency to be disrespectful or condescending and more likely to commit offences to the holy name. So Srila Prabhupada was very proud of his American and European first disciples, not just the first ones, but all of them while he was on the planet, because he could see that they had, in their hearts they were sincere and that they weren't offensive. So this is, we can take enthusiasm from this in our attempts to spread Krishna consciousness to others. That if somehow other people can begin chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, then we can be confident that they will gain the purification, but not just the purification, but also they're gaining the attachment or the attraction to Krishna. This is what we remember when we first started chanting Hare Krishna, that it wasn't just a purification of the heart. Actually, personally speaking, I'd already embarked on a quite strict regime of purification in terms of my lifestyle, become vegetarian, given up intoxication, given up uncleanliness, really started being very, very clean, regulating my sleeping habits. I'd started doing all of these things before I started chanting Hare Krishna. And so for me, the actual effect of chanting the Maha Mantra was not, I didn't necessarily perceive it so much in the purificatory process, but more on that it just made hearing philosophy or hearing about God, actually made it hearing about God, and not just from the Vaishnava perspective, but it just kind of illumined all theistic literature, and it just made the concept of being a servant of God exceptionally exciting and rejuvenating and exhilarating, intoxicating, you could say. And in that sense, I like this example Srila Prabhupada gives, like flogging a dead horse, which is an expression that my grandmother used to use when I was a child, and it basically means I think she would sometimes use it in the sense there's no point trying to tell, no point trying to chastise, she was maybe saying to my mother, don't bother, you're wasting your time with him, it's like flogging a dead horse. It's meaning that, I've tried to tell him 100 times and he doesn't take any notice, so just don't bother. It's like flogging a dead horse. It's actually in the Sanskrit, it's interesting, Srila Prabhupada uses that analogy, but the analogy that's used in India and the one that's actually in the Bhagavatam is actually beating the empty husk of rice, which means that to get some flour, rice flour, from rice, you have to you have to first of all thrash it. You know, so thrash it with like in some way. Actually, one way they do it is with they allow the cows to walk up and down the rice, and the cow's hooves separates the outer shell of the rice from the inner shell, and then using like the wind, then they kind of get rid of that shell, and then they're left with the rice, the inside of the rice, and then from that rice they can cook something. And and the example is often used in the Sanskrit, the Vedic literature, that trying to give instruction to a mad person is like trying to beat the husk that's already been husked. You know, what's the point of trying to beat it when the rice is already gone? So Srila Prabhupada created a society of like Hare Krishna mad people who couldn't be beaten out of their madness. You know, they were so like addicted to Krishna consciousness, and myself also, that you know no amount of any beating or criticism or ridicule would actually convince me to give it up. And I say that wasn't because it like had a purity. It wasn't because it like turned me into a better person and made me better behaved. I mean, it did a little bit, but it was more because it actually gave me a real taste or a real excitement to hear about God, and especially to hear about this quality of God as being inconceivable. And so most people in the world, they're atheists, or at least, you know, pretty hard to convince agnostics, because for them God is inconceivable. You know, how can God be a good person if he's all powerful? You know, how can you allow people to be born disabled, or you know, or how can you design a world which is like basically just death everywhere? You know, so to most people, God is inconceivable in that sense, but that inconceivability leads to resentment, envy, agnosticism. You know, whereas by the touch of Lord Chaitanya and the touch of a pure devotee and the touch of the Hare Krishna mantra, then the inconceivability of God becomes very exciting. And actually, this Srila Prabhupada was this expert preacher, so he was able to. He saw that very deep philosophical nature in the European and American boys and girls, that they'd been trying to understand God for centuries. And if you read like the history of Western philosophy, going all the way back to like Socrates, you know, like 500 years before Christ, that's basically what it's all about. It's like how can we understand, you know, the nature of good and evil, you know, or you know, the nature of causation and the nature of free will and the nature of hard determinism. You know, it's like good and bad. How can we get our heads around this, and how can we adapt it to our daily lives? And we actually, if you look at Western society, it had just come to the point where it was just so like it had given up. Like, by the time the 60s came, it was like people had just given up trying to work it out, and they were just, either they'd gone into complete hedonism and complete selfishness and complete ignorance, or alternatively they were going into like completely materialistic ways of looking at the world without any reference whatsoever to God, beginning with like Newton and Darwin and then Marx, and now it's like, now, you know, especially with the computer age, And then more and more people are just completely absorbed in seeing things from a materialistic point of view. And actually it wasn't so different in the 60s. Even by the time the 60s came, it was, at least in universities, and also in youth culture, I mean, God was not like a big feature. It wasn't something that was discussed very much. So Srila Prabhupada, as I say, with this instrument of the Hare Krishna mantra, and he, before that spark of sincerity was completely obliterated, he managed to like rekindle that spark in that whole generation. And now that we have this triple crisis, as it's called in the world, the United Nations have called it a triple crisis of the pandemic, loss of biodiversity, and the very, very critical state of the biosphere in terms of the climate and the pollution. And because we've got these three things, then for the first time in recorded history, at least from the Western perspective, we've got like the whole planet now, everyone from all countries of the world, all academics and people who have to think about politics, people who have to think about medicine, people who are thinking about, the geology and geography. They're all thinking how can we implement the measures to bring about the solution. They all know what the solution is because they've spent their whole lives, for the last 500 years in universities analysing everything. As I read recently, actually, I think it was more than 100 years ago that a scientist actually said that, if Western civilization, like American and European civilization, continues to dominate the world, then we'll actually very soon start to experience very unpleasant negative effects of our abuse. So it's been known for a long, long, long time. But politicians and social scientists have not been able to agree on how it could be possibly, how the governments could possibly create the policies to bring about those solutions. But now that discussion is going on in all the different levels of academia, and also academia are now not so proud as they used to be because they don't have the solution. So now they're actually taking advice from so-called laymen, people who've got more day-to-day experience of coping with antisocial behaviour, you could say. Social workers and the police and also ISKCON devotees like Mahatma Prabhu and Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu and Radhanath Swami, people who do counselling for leaders in different political parties as well as leaders in business. So it's a very exciting time, and just as I myself, I'm not saying that I became like a teetotaler and a nice clean living person just by my own endeavour. Definitely, actually, my mother was always praying for me actually. So I can definitely accept that it was actually only Krishna's mercy that enabled me to actually start living in a more kind of clean living way. And now, similarly, we can't really go to academics and politicians and sportsmen and say, oh, we can teach you how to get up early in the morning, we can teach you how to become vegetarian, we can teach you how to stop drinking, because they're actually already doing that already. And like a lot of this one guy, I don't know if anyone knows Jim Quick, and he's not like a spiritual teacher, not at all, not in the slightest. He's a business guru, and he just teaches you how you can like fulfill your material dreams and make money and whatever. But he gets up at 4:30 every morning, and he said the most important thing to do when you get up is to make your bed. Like make sure you tidy your bed really, really nicely, and then do some kind of meditation, whatever it is you do, and then eat like a handful of blueberries, and then go for a run. So anyway, and there are thousands of people now who are giving that kind of input. But what none of them are able to do is to explain why bad things happen to good people, and why bad things are going to happen to them, because they're all good people, at least in that way, but they're all going to grow old and die, and none of them knows really how to avoid cancer. I mean, okay, you can give yourself less chance of getting cancer by leading a healthy life, but there are a lot of really healthy people who still get cancer, and there's lots of really healthy people who have very, very traumatic experiences in life. But Jad, if we can become mad Hare Krishnas, then it doesn't matter how much we're beaten by cancer or beaten by terrorist organizations or beaten by our own genetic condition or whatever it is. And it doesn't matter how much we're beaten by people who try to tell us that believing in God is like old-fashioned. It doesn't matter how much anybody tells us any of those things. But if we really get a taste for reading Srimad Bhagavatam, get a taste for chanting Hare Krishna, and really get a taste for associating with the devotees nicely, and also learn from Maharaj Rahugana that always be eager to, always try to see every devotee as being our teacher, our spiritual master in some way. In some way, a devotee will have something that they can teach us from their understanding or their appreciation, and that we'll never know everything. That's our nature with infinitesimal. So therefore we can always have this exciting prospect of being a child who wants to learn more and more and more. And so that's really really important. And when people see that wow, these people are really excited. Actually, this is a very popular word on webinars and Zoom calls now. I listened to a Zoom call between 3 philosophy lecturers, and they all started off by saying, "This is really exciting." It's really exciting that we're here together discussing these things. And it's really exciting that people are actually going to have to listen to people that they don't agree with. That's really exciting. And because they've never really done that before, they've always just been in their little departments, and they've never had to think outside the box. So they're all having to think outside the box, and they're all actually excited about it. So it's so we've got a lot to share, and I want to thank Itok Shubhaguru for really doing these nice japa affirmations every morning. And this morning, Japa Affirmation 17, the quality of our mantra japa depends completely on the mercy of Guru and Krishna, and that we should act with the understanding that Krishna wants us to do our very, very best to accept the information and the instruction we've received and act upon it. Krishna wants us to become really diligent in our practice. But irrespective of how diligent we are, Krishna also wants us to continue praying and praying, and to continue looking for mercy from devotees, from the books we read, from the deities. So thank you very much. Yes, even though I don't always manage to get up here for 4:30 for the beginning of Mangalati, at least I get here for chapter affirmations. So thank you very much for that. So I'll stop there. Are there any comments or questions? Probably can't prove.
There's a nice point you're making about people having to hear each other who normally wouldn't hear from each other.
Yeah.
I find that to be true. Sometimes I visit an interfaith group online, and people who are on that group would ordinarily wouldn't give us the time of day on the street from our past experience. In fact, they would try to stop us in some way or another because it's seen as some kind of threat. But now they're seeing that the threat is that their own faith numbers is diminishing much, and they're seeing that we are actually upholding the principles which they would support and more. So they're actually beginning to waken up to that, and it's just another aspect of people hearing out of necessity. And the situation will change in such ways that they feel the need to actually listen to other people who are now maybe going to benefit them in their understanding of their own faith as well.
Yeah, well, in that sense, the COVID and the climate change and the biodiversity threats are like the poison medicine, which is so shocking to the whole world system that it's getting a real shake-up, and it's actually purifying people. They're actually giving up their differences, and they're surprising themselves by their ability to tolerate each other, and and I think a lot of people have really expressed that it's been an exciting time. So it's very interesting. But as I say, one thing that they haven't discussed, and it's amazing how, is that although they're discussing the need for a spiritual resilience, or it's nice that Mahaprabhu did that resilience course. But there still seems to be a real taboo to talk about God, and even to talk about, life after death. Nobody talks about reincarnation anymore. When I was a teenager and in my early 20s, everybody talked about reincarnation because it was it filtered through into mainstream society because of the songs of the bands, the things that the bands were singing about, and also about James Burke connections and things on the TV, weird and wonderful things from around the world. And so it's but now it's, other than the yoga scene, it's kind of it's very little talk of a next life.
But it does seem to be that there's a lot of acceptance of it, but they just haven't looked into where you can find out more about it. A lot of people do tend to. There's been some polls which have been done in America, and more than half the people believe that there's a next life.
Well, it's probably because they've been watching The Good Place, Mariana was telling me about there's been a sitcom on American television, the most popular sitcom for the last, probably since the Fonz, or something, and it's about a group of friends, and they end up going to heaven, and some of them are actually really pretty good people, but one of them who ends up in heaven, he's a really bad guy, and he realizes that somehow or other he must have got to heaven by mistake, so he better be really, really good, because otherwise they'll find out that he shouldn't really be there, because by the time he gets to heaven, he hears them talking about hell, you see, and he realizes that it actually exists. So that series was on TV in America for 3 years, every week, and it was like the top-rated series. So in that sense, but in popular, people don't mind talking about anything in a pub, but in a university department or in the public eye, because if you start talking about one religious view or one spiritual view, then you have to address the real touchy issues as well. So I think that's especially in because of all of the violence that's gone on, the abuse that's gone on around religion. So that's what's happened. But anyway, so just like Srila Prabhupada says there that in the purport that an expert preacher knows how to introduce the Shudras to spiritual concepts. It's exciting. It actually is exciting. I really feel that these webinars and these podcasts, this is really a brilliant way to, because it's people. It's like a comedy show, so you can get away with certain things that you would never get away with in a public, in a lecture theatre or even online. I mean, have you heard? There's one with Raghunath Rekapa from Shelter, and one of his friends from when they first joined the ashram together called Kashri, where they do a daily podcast called Wisdom of the Sages, and it's just it's hilarious, But at the same time, they're reading from the third canto of Bhagavatam every day, and they're actually talking about Vidura and Maitreya and Uddhava, and they're presenting it completely bona fide, straight from the Bhagavatam, but at the same time, they're talking they're having a banter going on continuously. So it's so it's very exciting in that sense. And I'm sure Srila Prabhupada, when we hear how Srila Prabhupada interacted with Shyama Sundar Prabhu and Mukunda Prabhu when they were still pretty much connected to the sort of, to the real heavy side of the hippie scene, nothing would faze Prabhupada at all. It's just like when one of Prabhupada's early disciples said that they thought they might have to go to prison for a drugs charge. Prabhupada said, well, Krishna was born in prison. And so it's and things haven't really changed that much actually. I think that's another nice thing about listening to these podcasts and chat shows. They're actually not really any different from what they were in the 60s, the 70s. They're just the same actually, just the same. Okay, stop there. Thanks very much. Grand Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Iskandar Vinda ki, Nitai Gaur Premanandi.
Vasi Guru ki,
Nitai Vaishnava Vinda ki.
Javat, do you know how to switch this off?
I know how to switch it off. I don't. Yeah, I do. Yeah. Just click on the where there's a cross on the tab, the tab that's open. It'll be the furthest one over to the right, as far as I know. Oh no, it'll be that one then, because that one's connected to this. So this, no, see that one.
Oh, I see. It's like a file.